CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. NATO members gather in Madrid as the military alliance commits to expansion to take on what it calls Russian aggression.
World leaders undertake to make Russia pay a high price for its invasion of Ukraine as the G7 summit ends.
Dozens of people still missing in Ukraine after a Russian missile hits a shopping mall, killing 18. That death toll is expected to rise.
The bodies of 50 people are found in a truck in Texas along a route often used by people smugglers in the country's worst case of migrant deaths.
And Ghislaine Maxwell awaits sentencing for her part in one of the largest ever sex trafficking rings in US history.
NATO leaders have been arriving in Madrid for their annual summit. The military alliance is expected to approve a significant increase in combat-ready troops stationed in countries bordering Russia.
Let's talk to our correspondent Rahul Pathak, who's in Madrid. So, Rahul, as NATO leaders gather, there is still a question over the memberships of Sweden and Finland.
That's right, Robin. Yeah, Sweden and Finland want to join NATO. Turkey currently holding this up. Turkey angered by what they feel are the Nordic countries' support for Kurdish militants. Sweden, along with Finland, did apply for NATO membership in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And that's a huge deal because for a long time both countries have prided themselves on being neutral. But the Swedish foreign minister was speaking earlier today from Brussels, where they've been holding preparatory talks. She said she was confident that some major developments will happen, maybe not today, but probably tomorrow here in Madrid. Now, of course, in terms of Spain, this is the second time, rather, that Spain has hosted a NATO summit, the first time being in 1997, and the capital really has been seeing a high level of security, unprecedented for this kind of event. Here's my report. Madrid back into partial lockdown. Only this time it isn't because of the pandemic. NATO is in town, the Spanish capital, playing host on the 40th anniversary of Spain's accession to the alliance. Now, many of the world leaders coming here to Madrid have recently been in before the G7 summit, where Ukraine also dominated the agenda. Now they're dealing with the same war, but in a different forum, a NATO summit described as the most significant and important in decades. President Volodymyr Zelensky is due to speak to NATO leaders via video link. The proposed candidacy of Finland and Sweden will also be discussed, but one of the most significant developments has already been announced, with the alliance set to beef up its rapid response force to 300,000 troops. Also on Tuesday, the NATO Secretary-General said the Madrid summit would set out the organisation's strategic direction for the next decade and beyond.
The Madrid summit will be a pivotal summit. We will agree a new strategic concept, the Madrid strategic concept, that will be the blueprint for NATO in a more dangerous and unpredictable world. We will agree a fundamental shift of deterrence and defence, with more high readiness forces, with more forward defence, with more pre-positioned equipment.
Representatives of 12 nations of Western Europe and North America.
The move to expand its military presence in Eastern Europe has some echoes of when the North Atlantic Treaty Organization was founded back in 1949. Then the United States and Canada, plus 10 Western European states, signed the treaty which created NATO to counter the former Soviet Union's influence in Eastern Europe. 72 years on, the alliance finds itself dealing with what it sees as a very similar threat. Now, for those of you with fantastic eyesight, I don't know if you can actually see the screen way over back there. That's actually Joe Biden, the US president, meeting with King Felipe VI. My producer very eager for me to say King Felipe VI of Spain. This is ahead of a royal gala dinner that's going to be taking place at the Royal Palace with Biden and the rest of the world leaders. But of course, the summit itself actually doesn't begin officially tomorrow, and that is when the real work begins. Back to you guys.
Rahul Pathak in Madrid, thank you.
Well, G7 leaders have vowed to ensure Russia pays a high economic and political price over its invasion of Ukraine. Ending its summit in Germany, the group of 7 major economies also pledged a further $4.5 billion to combat global food insecurity. Our correspondent Ira Spitzer is in Bavaria, where that G7 summit was held. Ira, what have the G7 leaders agreed?
Well, this was a summit that was largely dominated by the Ukraine crisis, and the G7 leaders taking great pains to express a position of unity, a message of unity against Russia for this invasion of Ukraine. And this is what we saw from the leaders' remarks after the conclusion of the summit. This is what we saw in the 28-page communique released by the G7, where they outlined a number of measures, and a lot of those measures really did come back to the conflict in Ukraine and some of the knock-on effects of that, such as the global food crisis, where because of the wheat that is currently stuck in Ukraine, that is really contributing to food insecurity, with those leaders pledging $4.5 billion to that effort. But let's have a listen to the German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz. Let's have a listen to what he had to say coming out of that summit.
The G7 stands united in its support for Ukraine. We are united in that President Putin must not win this war. We will continue to hold up and drive up the economic and political costs of this war for President Putin and his regime.
Now, those economic costs were outlined in some detail in the communique, and one of the more interesting measures proposed was a commitment from G7 nations to explore the idea of a price cap on Russian oil. Now, this is something that has never really been tried before, but the idea would be that the buyers of Russian oil would commit to not paying above a certain price. And the hope from the G7 is that this would both drive down energy prices, as well as make it much more difficult for Moscow to fund or continue to fund its invasion of Ukraine. But there are major questions about how this would actually work. It's been described as a prohibition on some of the associated services with shipping that oil. So buyers who don't agree to pay that lower price wouldn't have access to things such as insurance on their oil shipments, which do at the moment largely come from Europe and the UK. But for this to truly work, it would require buy-in from much of the world, including large countries like India and China, and that very much is an open question whether they would go along with a scheme like this.
Ira, thanks for that. Our correspondent Ira Spitzer in Bavaria.
50 people are now known to have died while being transported inside a truck which was found abandoned in the U.S. state of Texas. A number of survivors, including 4 children, are in hospital suffering from heat stroke and exhaustion. The vehicle was discovered on the outskirts of San Antonio, around 250 kilometers north of the Mexican border. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Tony Waterman, who's in San Antonio. So, Tony, what more do we know about what's happened?
Well, right now, Robin, we have officials on the ground, search crews on the ground. I'm not sure if you can see them over here behind me in the very far distance there. They are checking the surrounding areas because they're not 100% sure that they have actually found all of the victims or perhaps even some survivors. They don't know exactly how many people were inside of that tractor trailer, but as you say, it has now been confirmed 50 individuals have died. The Mexican president saying 22 of them are from Mexico, that 7 are Guatemalans and 2 are Hondurans. They're still working to identify the nationalities of individuals. 16 people, including 4 children, taken to local hospitals. We now know that several of those people have died and that a number of others are in critical conditions. The law enforcement saying that when they found these survivors, they were suffering from heat stroke, heat exhaustion, that they were physically hot to the touch. We are in the middle of a heat wave right now here in Texas. The temperatures in San Antonio rose above 39 degrees Celsius yesterday, and you can imagine that you have dozens of people crammed inside of this tractor trailer. There's little to no ventilation, so it was likely significantly warmer inside of there. Officials saying that there was a refrigeration system on this truck, but that it did not appear to be working and that they didn't find any water inside, so people likely also suffering from dehydration. This investigation now turned over to Homeland Security, a specialized unit that deals with smuggling. 3 individuals at this point have been taken into custody, but it's unclear what their exact connection is to this tragic event.
And Tony, Mexico has blamed poverty and border chaos. Some immigration campaigners have also criticized border policies.
Yeah, you're exactly right. We heard from the Mexican president this morning saying poverty, saying desperation, but also this lack of control at the border in his words. And certainly the governor of Texas, Republican Greg Abbott, has placed the blame for this tragedy at the feet of U.S. President Joe Biden, saying that he has not enacted the laws to their full force, that he's been too lenient, in essence, when it comes to migration. Certainly, he is friendlier to migrants than the former president, Donald Trump. There is also this train of thought that perhaps Title 42, that pandemic-era health policy that allowed officials to turn migrants away, even asylum seekers away at the border, may have contributed to the sharp increase in attempted border crossings that we have seen in the past year. These individuals do not face criminal penalties. They aren't detained. So many of them, once they are released, turn around and try to enter again. Of course, this is done out of desperation. Nobody wants to leave their home country for any old cause. These are people that are out searching for a better life. They're often spending hundreds of dollars paying these smugglers to try to get into the country. The president of Mexico saying that this is going to be a central topic of conversation when he sits down with President Biden on July 12th. President Biden releasing a statement just now saying that this was a tragic loss of life and that his administration is going to do everything in its power to try to dismantle this multi-billion-dollar smuggling network that, of course, again, exploits these individuals and takes them on quite dangerous trips. This is a well-known traveled smuggle route. Back in 2017, we had 10 individuals also found in a truck here in San Antonio. In 2003, 19 people found dead in Victoria, Texas. This is a long-standing problem and something that the Biden administration says it will be focusing on in the coming weeks and months.
Tony, thanks very much. Our correspondent Tony Waterman in San Antonio.
The British socialite Ghislaine Maxwell is due to be sentenced in New York for helping convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein abuse teenage girls. She faces up to 55 years in prison. Our correspondent Will Denslow is outside that court in New York. Will, what more can you tell us?
Well, we're just hearing some reports from an extract of an interview from Sky News, who've spoken to one of the victims, saying that Ghislaine Maxwell must die in prison because, as far as the victim says, that she has been to hell and back because of what Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein purportedly did to her. Of course, what we're expecting during this sentencing is to hear from up to 8 of Jeffrey Epstein's victims, including 2 of which testified during the trial. Of course, late last year, Ghislaine Maxwell was found guilty on 5 of 6 counts, including sex trafficking. Prosecutors during that trial said that Ghislaine Maxwell should be found guilty of manipulating, grooming and abusing girls, some as young as 14 years old. Of course, the judge very much, or the jury very much siding with them, finding her guilty on 5 of those 6 counts. There are also question marks about whether we'll hear directly from Ghislaine Maxwell. She will have the opportunity to speak if she wishes. Of course, that was an opportunity she chose not to exercise during the trial.
OK, we'll come back to you if there are any further developments, but for the moment, thanks for that. Our correspondent Will Denslow in New York.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Scotland's First Minister calls for a second vote on leaving the UK, 8 years after voters rejected independence.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. And a quick reminder, CGTN is available to watch for free on all of the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online at Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire, Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app. And in the UK, on Preview.
Scotland's First Minister has named a date for a new vote on whether the country should leave the United Kingdom. Nicola Sturgeon confirmed a consultative referendum on independence will be held on the 19th of October next year. The Scottish National Party says Brexit means a new poll is necessary.
The bill states that the question on the ballot paper should be, just as it was in 2014, should Scotland be an independent country? Finally, Presiding Officer, the bill includes the proposed date on which the referendum should be held. In line with the Government's clear mandate, this is a date within the first half of this term of Parliament. Presiding Officer, I can announce that the Scottish Government is proposing that the independence referendum be held on the 19th of October 2023.
Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Andrew Wilson. Andrew, what can we expect from a second Scotland referendum, if indeed it does go ahead?
Well, you're right there, Jamie. If indeed it does go ahead. 2014, the last time they voted on independence for Scotland, was very close. It may be close again. But the more important point at the moment for discussion is it's still a long way away, not just because it's October 2023 that the SNP is talking about, but because it's not exactly clear how this is yet to go ahead. It was a busy day in the Scottish Parliament today. Lots of argument with Nicola Sturgeon pulling out the usual language about Scotland charting its own course and putting the levers of control in the hands of Scotland. Now, the rules is that it's up to Westminster whether or not there's a referendum. It's called Section 30. David Cameron, back in 2014, granted that as a vote to the SNP to lead a referendum then. There's no sign that Boris Johnson is going to do the same thing. So Nicola Sturgeon's plan this time is to apply for the right for a referendum to the UK Supreme Court, in that it's what Scottish people want, and therefore it's something that has to be acknowledged and gone ahead with. Now, that puts the Supreme Court in a bind, because if they agree that she's right, they may have to say yes to a referendum. But if they do, that's pretty much unconstitutional, because it's up to Westminster, as I said, whether or not a vote goes ahead. So observers are looking at the other reasons this date may have been announced. The SNP's raison d'etre is independence for Scotland. They've been in power for over a decade now. That's what they're supposed to be achieving. They haven't managed it yet, so they think there is an argument to say they're just trying to keep this on the agenda. Their opponents in the Scottish Parliament talk about the Ukraine, about the energy crisis, about cost of living and inflation, and say that the SNP is abandoning the real issues in favour of this one obsession of theirs. But nonetheless, that's what the SNP is there to do, and they're doing what they can to keep it on the agenda.
There's another big UK constitutional wrangle taking place. Plans by London to scrap parts of the Northern Ireland Protocol have been described as illegal by some at Westminster, but they have cleared their first hurdle in the House of Commons.
Well, it's funny, a row in Scotland and a row in the UK, and it's not quite clear why they're going ahead, what the real reasons are. It's said that Boris Johnson wanted a tougher bill to go through, but Rishi Sunak, as Chancellor, wanted it to be slightly lighter. Nonetheless, the UK did promise, the government did promise some kind of go-it-alone prospect for trying to dissolve the current Northern Ireland Protocol. As we know, the protocol is all about goods going from the UK into Northern Ireland and being subject to the same restrictions they would be if they were going into the European Union, because Northern Ireland is part of, de facto, the European Union, having that land border with Ireland. The document's quite detailed. It talks about green lanes and red lanes. Goods going into Northern Ireland only and not going any further would go through green lanes with no checks. Goods going into destined for the European Union would go through red lanes. It talks about separate laws for goods and produce sold in Northern Ireland as opposed to in the European Union. Those sausages that the European Union would reject could still be sold in Belfast. It's dismantling all the principles of the Northern Ireland Protocol. But again, the question is, why is this happening? Well, we do know that the Stormont, the Northern Ireland government, is in complete freeze at the moment because the Unionist parties have effectively gone on strike over the protocol and are refusing to take part in a power-sharing government. The UK says that's putting Northern Irish politics in jeopardy. And also they're saying that this is some way, perhaps, of rebuilding this coalition government that's supposed to be functioning in Stormont, but simply can't because of the protocol. Here's the Foreign Secretary.
We are taking this action to uphold the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, which has brought peace and political stability to Northern Ireland. The Northern Ireland Protocol is undermining the functioning of the agreement and of power sharing. It has created fractures between East and West. It has diverted trade and meant people in Northern Ireland are being treated differently from people in Great Britain.
Well, as you said, Jamie, there are plenty within the government and beyond who think that this would be illegal to set up an alternative protocol without going a partnership with Brussels. But what's interesting is in the vote yesterday, the government carried this bill with 74 majority, I think. And that means that all those rebels in the Tory party that aren't happy with this bill going ahead didn't vote against it. They abstained, made their feelings clear that way, but didn't vote against it. That means that they want to have a chance to pick through it. They don't want to start the kind of punch-up that would have started then. They want to wait and see where they get on with this. And I think that's because there's another reason for this bill going ahead, and it may just be, there's no confirmation of this, of course, it may just be a negotiating tactic on the part of Westminster to try and get Brussels to see that the UK means business and really does want this protocol renegotiated, because thus far, Maros Sefcovic and his team in Brussels are saying, a deal's a deal. There's nothing really we can add to this. The UK is saying that's unacceptable, and perhaps this is Westminster's way of showing it.
Andrew, thanks for that. Our correspondent, Andrew Wilson.
The president of the European Central Bank has played down concerns about a recession in the Eurozone. Speaking at the bank's annual conference in Portugal, Christine Lagarde said her team is ready to move faster on interest rates if inflation continues to rise. Eurozone inflation is expected to hit 6.8% this year. That's well above the ECB's target of 2%.
So in this setting, we have revised markedly down our forecast for growth in the next 2 years. But we're still expecting positive growth rates due to the domestic buffers against the loss of growth momentum.
London's Heathrow Airport has been ordered to cut its passenger charges over the next 4 years. The Civil Aviation Authority says the reduction reflects the recent rebound in passenger numbers, but would still allow the airport to invest. Heathrow had wanted the charges raised and says this cut will undermine delivery of key improvements.
More than 100,000 UK mail workers are voting on whether to go on strike over pay. The result is expected on July the 19th. A number of sectors have either taken or voted for industrial action in recent weeks as the cost of living soars.
Sri Lanka has suspended fuel sales for private vehicles amid its worst economic crisis in decades. Petrol and diesel will be diverted to essential services only for the next 2 weeks. Schools in urban areas have closed and people are being asked to work from home. Sri Lanka is in talks over a bailout and is struggling to pay for food, medicine and fuel imports.
Temperatures in Tokyo are at their highest for over 150 years as a heatwave engulfs Japan. Authorities have warned of power outages with temperatures hitting over 35 degrees. People have been advised to stay indoors and keep electricity use to a minimum.
Hong Kong International Airport is about to get a lot busier.
A third runway is set to open, taking passenger and cargo numbers to new heights. Our correspondent Huang Fei reports.
6 years in the making, costing $18.2 billion, Hong Kong's third runway finally ready for takeoff. It's a massive undertaking that involves reclaiming 6.5 square kilometers of land north of the existing island. Airport chiefs have described it as building an entirely new airport next to the old facility.
Before the pandemic, we were able to handle 7.5 million passengers and 500 tons of cargo annually. Our dual runway system was already at its limit. To bring more traffic to Hong Kong, we had to expand by adding another runway. We're confident this would help raise our capacity by 50%. It's a significant upgrade that would raise the airport's competitiveness and help drive the economy.
Behind me is the much-anticipated third runway. It's been hailed by city officials as a major milestone. The government hopes this expansion project will help boost Hong Kong's status as an international aviation hub.
The airport authority says the multi-billion-dollar expansion is designed to meet the city's long-term air travel demand, especially as it seeks to become an economic driver in the Greater Bay Area. Hong Kong wants to become a more attractive gateway for businesses looking to invest in the region, with a combined population of 86 million.
Our survey has found that an increasing number of foreigners choose to invest in Hong Kong because we're a gateway to the Greater Bay Area and, by extension, the wider mainland market. Hong Kong must serve as a strong platform where international business can come in and local companies can access global markets.
Hong Kong's economic recovery has hit a speed bump, with its first quarter GDP contracting 4%. But as COVID control measures ease, the airport authority is optimistic about the future.
Indeed, COVID-19 has dealt a huge blow to airports around the world, including ours. Luckily, despite big declines in passenger numbers, our cargo volume has remained the highest in the world. It's not that people don't need airports or don't want to travel. I think in 2 to 3 years' time, once the pandemic is over, we'll be back to normal. Low times are the best time to invest. So not only did we not stall the expansion projects, we accelerated them.
Experts agree that global air traffic will return to pre-pandemic levels at the start of 2024. That's when the airport city will be ready to flex its new wings. And with that, hopes of greater economic revival in the region. Huang Fei, CGTN, Hong Kong.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, China cuts COVID quarantine time for international visitors. We'll take stock of where we are on the pandemic.
What I show of China is what I really expect. What people in the West experience in China.
70 years ago, a small group of British businessmen travelled to China to unlock opportunities between the two countries. They became known as the icebreakers.
I think it's fantastically important to educate British people about Chinese history and culture.
We have sown seeds which in China have grown to very big trees.
The values of horsemanship, respect, responsibility, compassion can be extended to all relationships.
My name is Max. I'm a food blogger. I grew up in China. Now I live in the UK.
We deserve respect, and the Chinese people with their own culture also deserve respect.
For cross-cultural understanding, I think food is a really good place to start. I hope to spread awareness of all the different cultures within China. I think there's a lot to share.
To increase understanding between cultures, I think time and patience is of course important, but the most important thing is responsibility.
Meet the bridge builders, the individuals who dare to think beyond the horizon and open up our world.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. NATO members gather in Madrid as the military alliance commits to expansion to take on what it calls Russian aggression.
World leaders undertake to make Russia pay a high price for its invasion of Ukraine as the G7 summit ends.
And Ghislaine Maxwell awaits sentencing for her part in one of the largest ever sex trafficking rings in US history.
Ukraine says 18 people were killed and 40 are still missing after Russia's missile strike on a shopping mall. There's been international condemnation of the attack in the city of Kremenchuk. The G7 says the shelling, which took place during busy shopping hours, constitutes a war crime by Russia. Moscow says it targeted a weapons depot, which then triggered a fire at the shopping mall.
Well, let's talk to Associated Press correspondent Kieran McQuillan, who's in Lviv. So, Kieran, what's the latest on this attack?
A huge operation ongoing at that mall, the Amstor shopping centre in the city of Kremenchuk, down next to the banks of the Dnieper River here in Ukraine. 1,000 people there at the moment combing through the wreckage of that mall. The local state emergency services say that 70% now of the mall has been dismantled and is being pulled out as rubble as the rescuers there go through it bit by bit, trying to find some of the remains of those charred bodies inside that shopping mall, which exploded in an inferno of fire yesterday as it was attacked by some Russian cruise missiles. Now, the latest death toll that we're getting from the scene is that 18 people have unfortunately lost their lives. 25 people are hospitalized, and that 21 people, the Interior Ministry say, are still regarded as missing. Now, a little bit later in hospital, we had an AP team there yesterday and today. We spoke to a survivor in hospital this morning who refuted some of these claims that Russia says that at the time the mall was empty and that they had hit another depot close by and that the flames from that had triggered this fire. This is what this survivor had to say in hospital.
I flew head first, and splinters, shrapnel or something were hitting my body. The whole place was collapsing, exploding. Then I landed on the floor, and I don't know if I was conscious or unconscious. I didn't understand anything. I opened my eyes and I saw 2 big pieces of rubble on top of me, and I started to scream, "Help me."
So, Kieran, what's Moscow saying about what happened?
The Defense Ministry of Moscow, their spokesman Igor Konachenko, saying that this was an attack on a depot that using precision-guided missiles, a depot that was storing weapons that were destined for the front lines. Some of these weapons that are now coming into the front lines across from NATO countries and from the G7, those weapons that have been pledged to them. Now, they say that it's worth noting, by the way, that this depot, that the city, Kremenchuk, and this depot that they supposedly hit is 350 kilometers from the front lines. The Ukrainians do say, indeed, that there was a second missile. It had hit a factory that was being used to store some machinery parts. Wayne Jordash, who is part of the team of Irina Viktorovna, she's the Prosecutor General of Ukraine, he says that they are investigating this. He says that despite these Russian claims that this was a military site, there seems to be no evidence of that so far, but they will continue to investigate.
And Kieran, the G7 has been talking about this attack at their summit. The hope in Ukraine will be that this marks a turning point in military support against Russia.
This has turned into a duel of artillery down on the front lines in the Donbass region. And really, at the moment, it looks like the Ukrainians are a little bit on the back foot. The deputy head of military intelligence, Vadim Shvitsky, said that everything in the Donbass now depends on what the West can offer them, and that includes heavy guns and artillery shells. It seems that the Ukrainians are running out of those. They use Soviet guns. Soviet guns take 122 or 152 millimeter gauge caliber shells. they're running out of these shells, it seems. All that the NATO and G7 can provide are 105 and 155 millimeter shells, or the guns that take those. So right now those guns are coming in, but they're coming in at a slow pace, and the Ukrainians need training on them. This really has turned into a battle of artillery down there. Some estimates say that 60,000 shells a day are coming in from the Russian side. The Ukrainians are able to counter that with between 5,000 and 6,000 shells from their side. An old-fashioned World War II style duel of artillery in the Donbass.
Kieran, thanks very much. Kieran McQuillan from the Associated Press in Lviv.
Discussions are taking place over how to eventually rebuild Ukraine. Germany's Chancellor Olaf Scholz has called for a modern-day Marshall Plan, which helped rebuild Germany after the Second War.
Our correspondent Michael Voss reports on the scale of the destruction in Ukraine and what reconstruction is likely to cost.
Valery Gumanyuk is shifting through the rubble of what's left of his home, removing the shrapnel and other metal objects. His house was hit by shells when the Russians took Irpin. Now he's moved back into parts of the ground floor, using plastic sheets over the windows that weren't totally destroyed.
And you're sleeping here?
Sleep, да, тут. Sleep too. What?
Holes in the ceiling. Do you think you could ever rebuild this house?
Надеюсь, зараз я покажу на кухне.
I hope so. I've already drawn up plans for the roof. I've bought all the materials and Frown's helped me unload it. I'm just hoping to get the roof covered this summer before winter sets in.
There are many in Irpin, though, who will never be able to move back into their old homes, which are beyond repair.
Irpin is a small commuter town on the edge of Kyiv, but entire apartment blocks and homes have been destroyed, along with the main railway bridge. Multiply this by the rest of the country, and reconstruction is going to run into billions of dollars.
Andrei Ginkel is a development specialist working closely with both the Ukrainian government and foreign organisations. I asked him for his estimate of reconstruction costs.
I think that the cost of the reconstruction and modernization will be not less than $1 trillion.
$1 trillion?
$1 trillion, not less, and maybe even bigger.
The West has said it wants to help. Do you think it's prepared to put its hands in its pocket?
I'm not only have the feelings, I do participate in that, and I do know that already the process of the Marshall Plan, so-called Marshall Plan initiatives preparation already starts, and soon we will see the first draft of this kind of plans.
Do you think everything needs to be rebuilt?
Some places should not be rebuilt or should be totally changed in use.
Why?
Because many people will not come back because they do not have the jobs, they do not have the facility, and they will not wish to come because they will stay in big cities, in European cities, all over the world, but they will not come to the village or will not come to the town which was for them the place before.
As Monday's missile strike on a shopping centre shows, there is a continuing high human cost to this conflict as well. Even when the rebuilding can begin, no amount of reconstruction will be able to replace what Ukraine has lost. Michael Voss, CGTN, Ukraine.
China has reduced COVID quarantine for inbound travellers by half. Visitors will now need to spend 7 days in isolation and then monitor their health at home for a further 3 days. The previous requirement was up to 3 weeks of quarantine. This comes after Beijing and Shanghai said they had no new locally transmitted COVID infections.
The UK is fighting a growing number of COVID infections as experts warn the country could be facing a fifth wave, with the latest figures showing 1.7 million people testing positive in the last week. Let's talk to Mohammed Munir, a lecturer in molecular virology from Lancaster University. Welcome back to the programme. The pandemic obviously looks different in different parts of the world, but how concerning is this rise in UK COVID-19 new cases and hospitalisation? How worried should we be?
Yeah. I think there is a relatively little worry at the global scale, but there are individual cohorts that are at high vulnerability. For instance, people who have chosen not to be vaccinated, people who are passing through a certain age threshold, 60 plus particularly, and people with immunocompromised status. So those people are really the ones that are more vulnerable on a sheer number of cases when we see at a country level. And I think this time is slightly different, because our only benchmark of assessing the severity of the disease is hospitalization, because the people are not being tested at a population scale. And that is worrying in some way, because people who ended up in hospital, if that is the benchmark to see the severity of the disease, that is too little and too late, because at that time we can't really do anything. So therefore the testing must be done at the community level, where we know the situation of the disease before they end up in the hospital.
I think last time we were on, you were on the programme, we were in the middle of the pandemic and everyone was wearing masks and social distancing was the order of the day and a ban on public gatherings. I mean, are we approaching the possibility of having to look again at the reintroduction of masks and social distancing and so on?
So that's a very important point, Jamie, because over the last 2.5 years, I think learned enough, and we do understand that the masks provide best economical, non-pharmaceutical intervention to block the transmission of the infection. And this is not a restriction. Wearing a mask is not a restriction, it's a protection, it's a control measure. So therefore, I think it is more important at this moment when the number of cases are increasing significantly, and we are at the time when there are large events are to be planned, for example, Somerset or in Edinburgh musical festival, or these gatherings are really the breeding sources for this virus to transmit. So having mask in the pocket, having mask into the cars, and wearing it at the time when you go into gathering, you go into indoor setting is really advisable.
And what about vaccines? Are we going to be seeing a vaccine campaign this autumn?
Oh, certainly, we have to ramp up with the vaccines, because that is the only way we can immunize the population at a larger scale. We do understand there are complexities with the vaccine, particularly with the waning immunity, but the next booster, I mean, it needs to be expanded beyond 50 years and lower age group in the UK, and have to amplify it, because people have already started waning the immunity, and that immunity is not boosted. That means that the number of cases would increase more than what we are currently seeing.
Do you sense that there is public support for a continuation of the vaccination campaign and other restrictions, or do you sense that we're beyond now and the public has moved beyond this?
No, certainly, I think we all appreciate that the overall situation and overall the message from the government is such that the public is very much complacent. There is no COVID according to their calculation or the way they are being communicated the message. But literally, we are still passing through the pandemic. We haven't been through yet to this pandemic, and the possibility for this virus to come up with new variants is very likely. I mean, on an average, since the start of this pandemic, we are having a new variant every 3 months, and it's no mean we are done with this one. And if we are even done it, virus hasn't done with us, and there is no saturation level for this virus to mutate more and more. And it will carry on mutating until it's reached to a point where we have literally no fuel left for the virus to fuel on.
Mohammed Munir from Lancaster University, thank you very much indeed for talking to us.
Thanks for having me.
Restaurant owners in Malaysia are desperate to capitalise on the demand for dining out after an end to COVID lockdowns.
But labour shortages, especially if foreign workers, are a problem, forcing many of them to innovate. Our correspondent Ryan Meltzer reports.
Hundreds of thousands of migrant foreign workers from countries such as Indonesia, Bangladesh and India returned home from Malaysia during the pandemic. And due to a mix of border closures, governments renegotiating labour deals and red tape, few have returned yet. That's left many industries, including restaurants, unable to capitalise on the huge resurgence of business since restrictions were lifted in the past couple of months. The pandemic saw thousands of restaurants close here, but those that survived are having to trim their opening hours, close off sections, brace customers for long waits, and try to recruit local workers to fill the staff void.
We are short of like 1/3 of our staffs, and we are also hiring locals. We are also giving some perks. We're giving free iPhones up to 6 months. So these iPhones so far, 5 has already claimed previously, and in this coming 1st of July, there's another 2 more staffs claiming.
McDonald's has resorted to similar tactics, with fast food chains being anything but fast due to staff shortages. It's all become very cutthroat, with reports of companies hiring agents to try to poach workers from other businesses.
So at this moment of time, we are really suffering, not only us, all the restaurants in Malaysia.
Some restaurants, like this modest Indian Muslim eatery, have invested in robot waiters, allowing their human staff to focus on food preparation. It's one way to get around the difficulty of bringing migrant foreign workers back into the country, or enticing locals to do jobs that Malaysians are all too reluctant to do. Ryan Meltzer, CGTN, Kuala Lumpur.
Until the pandemic, they met at the Chinese Bridge Club in London to improve their Mandarin skills, but COVID paused the language learning.
But now the lessons are back, but for how long, given the geopolitical tensions weighing heavily on diplomatic relations? Our correspondent Nui Jabakal reports.
As far as languages go, this is considered one of the hardest to learn. Yet almost 1 in 7 people worldwide speak Mandarin.
Because it's a leading...
This is the China Bridge competition, back in person for the first time since the pandemic. It's for university students aged 18 to 30 and test their language skills and understanding of China's culture. Organised by the Confucius Institute, it takes place in various countries, from Romania to Uganda, with winners heading to China for a global final. William Hart picked up the UK award and had this advice for potential learners.
I would say get a lot of Chinese friends and spend a lot of time just immersing yourself in Chinese content and enjoying using the language. Make it a hobby rather than a chore.
Education is one sector where ties between the UK and China are strongest, but students and universities alike are feeling the impact of more political scrutiny. Some lawmakers in Britain now want Confucius Institutes banned from campuses as they're funded by the Chinese government. They say they pose a threat to free speech. That claim was denied by the body's chief here in the UK, who said threats of a ban would harm students and make cultural exchanges like these more difficult.
The current situation is a lack of understanding. I think if the critics would bother to learn a bit more about China and its culture, they would realize more about what we're actually doing.
Nonetheless, the proposed law is currently making its way through Parliament and could be signed off within weeks. It will impact the 30 Confucius Institutes at UK universities and means students could find it harder to learn Mandarin moving forward. 21 years into this competition, the future of the Chinese bridge here looks a little more uncertain. Nui Jabakil, CGTN, London.
At least 13 people have died and over 260 have been injured by a chlorine gas leak in Jordan. Authorities say a chemical storage container crashed down onto a ship when a crane malfunctioned at the Red Sea port of Aqaba. Chlorine gas is a common cleaning agent but can be deadly when inhaled.
At least 3 people have been killed and 50 injured after an Amtrak train derailed in the US state of Missouri. 8 cars and 2 locomotives came off the tracks after it hit a truck at an uncontrolled railway crossing. The truck driver is reported to be among the dead. The train, carrying 275 passengers, was on its way to Chicago from Los Angeles.
The 1-year-old former Nazi concentration camp guard has been sentenced to 5 years in jail. The man, who cannot be identified for legal reasons, was found guilty of assisting in the murder of thousands of prisoners between 1942 and 1945. He's the oldest former Nazi to stand trial in a German court. The man denies the charges and is set to appeal. Environmental campaigners have criticised G7 leaders for not taking firmer action on global warming as the summit ends in Bavaria. Keeping the world's focus on the green agenda is one of the priorities of Germany's G7 presidency.
And one place where that's being put into practice is the northwest industrial city of Essen. Our correspondent Natalie Carney reports.
Essen is a city of around 600,000 that sits in the center of Germany's heavy industry heartland, the Ruhr region. It was from here that millions of tons of coal were excavated and processed to help industrialize the country. But the decline of the coal and steel industry forced Essen to rethink its future. Essen has a history of transformation, says Kai Lipsius from the city's Green Capital Agency.
150 years ago, it was a very rural place, and when the coal mining began, and also the steel industry became, so the industrialization and the urbanization really started. Then already in the 80s, the downturn of the coal mining started, and so the reinvention again of the city had to be made.
While heavy industry brought jobs and wealth, it also brought environmental disaster. So a number of projects were enacted, dedicated to clearing the gray skies, cleaning up the polluted rivers, and creating safe green space for its citizens. The closure of factories helped bring back blue skies and provide the space for the area's much-needed parks.
Krupp Park is a prime example of Essen's evolution from gray to green. Where once stood the Krupp cast steel factory is now home to 22 hectares of lovely green space, with a lake, cycling trails, and plenty of rest areas.
The remains of the factory destroyed in World War II lay here until the early 2000s, when construction of the park began. The 376 kilometers of bike lanes known as the Radschnellweg Ruhr, which runs through the park, provides an alternative to driving. And the park's lake, fed by rainwater, has helped bring back wildlife and biodiversity. Nature has also returned to the grounds of the Zollverein coal mine and coking plant, one of the largest industrial complexes. World Heritage Site for its industrial heritage.
The plant today is quite different. It is preserved. It's the same plant as it was when it was closed down, but it's a place for arts, for culture, for history, for sports, for economic, for everyone to enjoy to be here.
More parks have been created here, allowing the plant species from all over the world that arrived with the coal trucks to grow amidst the concrete, brick and steel structures. In 2017, Essen was recognized as a European Green City by the European Commission, a title Lipsius is very proud of.
I think the award is really about this historic perspective of change from a very industrialized urban area to this now more sustainable future city, and about the issues of waste management, of water management, of air quality. Definitely for us it was a boost on our journey to become a sustainable city.
Decades before, Essen had an image to be the greatest coal mining city in Germany. And this period is over, and now Essen has transformed from a grey city to a green city with a lot of living quality. And that's just very important. And we have new possibilities now.
The city is focused on even more improvements to its quality of life, with the goal of becoming a climate-neutral city by 2030. Natalie Carney, CGTN, Essen, Germany.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Getting out of a hole. We're in Tanzania next, where tourists are helping sea turtles take their first steps.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw. The cleanup operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So now we've actually become the border on this road.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew.
The focus is firmly on future technologies.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Conservation of sea turtles in Africa has made good progress in recent decades, but tens of thousands of turtles still die each year due to human activity.
One organisation in Tanzania is running an eco-tourism initiative in a bid to try to secure the turtle population and protect the nesting sites. Our correspondent Isaac Lucando reports.
About 200 sea turtles have hatched from 2 nests at Kimbiji Beach in Dar es Salaam. 20 years later, they will be in a position to reproduce, but due to the threat of human activity, over 95% of them will not be allowed to do so. For the last 20 years, SeaSense, a conservation organization based in Tanzania, has been working towards their preservation.
In the past, the situation was really bad because turtles were being eaten like any other meal. If fishermen saw turtles surfacing on the ocean, that would be the end of the turtle's life.
Conservationists say hawksbill sea turtles are one of 2 species that nest in Tanzania, and only around 83,000 of them are left in the world. They believe they can foster greater appreciation for the turtles by allowing tourists to watch hatchings.
This is amazing. It's like the birth of 200 amazing creatures.
So it's fantastic to see people taking care of the turtles to make sure that they have a greater chance to make it to that 1-year mark.
A recent study by the UK's University of Exeter showed that over the last 57 years, sea turtle numbers along the coast of Tanzania and 4 other countries appear to be improving. The study also reveals that illegal capture of turtles, accidental fishing, and destruction of nests are still causing the loss of sea turtles in the tens of thousands every year.
All 7 existing species of sea turtles are under threat of extinction, putting an end to the 110 million years they have roamed the Earth's oceans. But through education, conservationists in Tanzania are hoping to prolong their existence.
In addition to eco-tours, tagging sea turtles and protecting their nests, SeaSense has been educating school children every 3 months in the hopes of increasing awareness in the local community. But conservationists warn that the danger to sea turtles still exists.
If people keep eating turtles, their children will not see them within this century because their numbers will greatly reduce. The turtles that will have been born will remain, but the offsprings of those that come to lay eggs won't get a chance to return to the water, and their lives will end here.
Tourists who come to see sea turtles contribute around $9, half of which goes to the local community to help sea turtle conservation efforts. Through this, organizations like SeaSense hope to make Tanzania's 1,400-kilometer coastline a safe haven for sea turtles for generations to come. Isaac Lucando, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
The headlines again. NATO members gather in Madrid as the military alliance commits to expansion to take on what it calls Russian aggression.
World leaders undertake to make Russia pay a high price for its invasion of Ukraine as the G7 summit ends.
And Ghislaine Maxwell awaits sentencing for her part in one of the largest ever sex traffickings in US history.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
More on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all the team here in London, goodbye.
Goodbye.